March 16th, 2021. This is the second video that I am doing today. I just did one discussing issues related to nuclear parity and how nuclear parity has to be evaluated. The discussion doesn't really end with assessing nuclear parity. As I mentioned in that previous video, China may not have nuclear parity with the United States right now, but it doesn't effectively matter. They still do effectively have a mutual assured destruction policy with the United States, whether or not it's spoken and agreed to and out in the open or not. Uh, the fact is, if you have any potential of having any second strike capability whatsoever, you're already in a mad relationship with every other nation that has that capability. Um, we don't know what what India has in terms of intercontinental ballistic missile technology, but we do know that they have orbital missiles or orbital rockets, and quite good ones, especially given the budget that they've had. They have a remarkably robust space program. Um, so, getting a missile from India to anywhere in the world, that's not the issue for them. Whether or not they've actually put the two together, that's almost certain. It's almost certain that they've done that. In a similar way, Japan has a latent nuclear program without having a nuclear program. They've got all the stuff, all the know-how, all the development is already done. They just have yet to actually build a weapon. But they've got all the pieces. Uh, and that could, I mean, you're talking a matter of weeks for that to change, if something were to go wrong. The Israelis, we don't know. We know they've got they have orbital rocketry technology, and they had for a long time a nuclear program that was semi-secret. Now it's well known that they have a nuclear program. What we don't know is have they put the two together. But we can assume that they probably have. France is in the same situation. Um, it is reasonable to say that France, Israel, Russia, uh, China, India, and the United States are all in a single, essentially mad relationship with one another. So even tiny Israel, if you were to first strike Israel, you'd probably be getting a response right away. Before your strike hit, they'd probably pass each other in flight. Um, so that's which may become an explicit mad relationship if Iran actually manages to weaponize the developments that they've pursued. And they don't even need intercontinental ballistic missile capability in terms of Iran. They're not going very far. They've already got the missile technology that they need, even without being a country that's managed, stable orbital flight yet. So anyway, once you're in a mad relationship, there is an absolute limit to the level of war you can commit to. So let's say, for example, if the United States were to invade China, conventionally invade, not using nuclear weapons, just conventionally invade. Uh, if it were to contribute all its resources to it, if it were to mobilize the way that it did in World War II, there is no question that the United States could invade successfully all of China. The problem with that is, one, the costs of it would be astronomical and unreasonable. Uh, Second would be, once you're there, what are you going to do? Like, there's no point in invading China. It's a dumb thing to do. A war of invasion would very quickly become a war of occupation. We've already seen that even occupying Afghanistan or Iraq is a non-trivial, as a non-trivial feat. So, you wind up in the situation where you have traditional problems that people don't even discuss today because they're politically unpalatable at the moment. That will change someday. But at the moment, the idea that if you're going to occupy, you have to colonize. And generally that means killing all the women and taking all the women for you so that the next generation looks more like you than their grandparents. Um, that's kind of the only fully effective way to colonize. And it's really not the kind of thing that we do these days. Um, and that makes the political cost too high. So the material cost is unbelievable. The human cost is unreal. The technical cost is very high. The opportunity cost is astronomical because we'd probably, you know, we'd lose out on a lot of stuff Uh, relationships, trade opportunities, technology, all kinds of stuff would be lost with that. Not to mention, heaven forbid, Nikes would become very expensive and there wouldn't be any iPads or iPhones or whatever, at least for a while. So all that stuff adds into the cost of invading China. So, but let's just imagine that we were going to do that. The United States is going to invade China and take it over. At the moment in the war, in the conventional war, that China realizes, Beijing realizes, there is no stopping this. The juggernaut is here. The only thing you've pushed them completely to the wall, and you have forced them to engage at this point in absolute warfare. Now, on your end, you're at total war. Now, these are kind of weird definitions, total war and absolute war, but the basic idea is that total war, you've completely mobilized your entire country to go to war. Absolute war, though, is where there's no holds barred. You're completely, and in all ways, hell-bent on the destruction of your enemy, even if it kills you. And that's the situation that you would put China in. It's like a cornered, wounded animal, right? That's the most dangerous animal in the universe, is a wounded, cornered animal. It doesn't really matter if it's a dog or an antelope or a lion or whatever. At that moment, don't mess with that animal because you've got them cornered, and there's no limits to what they might attempt. Well, if you are in a full conventional press, you're pushing everything you've got against mainland China, and you're invading. You're halfway through the country already. You've got armored formations going through it. You've got air superiority. You've got everything. The whole country's about to be on lockdown under your military control. There is nothing to do except knock the legs out from under the American military than launching a nuclear strike at the United States to wipe out all the supporting cities, cut all logistical lines, and probably nuke part of China too, wherever, any place that there's a large concentration of American forces in China, nuking that also. So a nuclear strike becomes an inevitability. So it starts out as like this thing that there's a level fact of potential nuclear conflict on the table in any negotiation. That's just sitting there. The likelihood of a nuclear strike, though, is like zero because of mutual assured destruction. Now, once you do assure their destruction in a conventional way, though, it doesn't mean that nukes are off the table. That becomes their only and last resort, and they have no option but to use it. And that's that. You never push your opponent completely. Never push them completely. It's just like if we look back at the violence and negotiation video that I did, the two tigers or lions or whatever example I used, the two predators in a room with meat between them, they negotiate by growling and being nasty to each other, but they will not go to an all-out fight. Going to an all-out fight introduces the risk of unnecessary crippling injury to both of them. So that's not something that you would want to try to do at all. So, how do conflicts unfold once mutual assured destruction has, once that situation is manifested? There's two ways. One is you get proxy wars. Little wars over places that people don't really care about so much. They're only somewhat in the news. They're not really the big thing. Vietnam was an example of that. That was kind of a larger one. The Korean War is an example of that. The current, still continuing from that time, the current situation with North Korea and South Korea and Japan and China and all that, which, diplomatically speaking, the existence of North Korea is the gift that keeps on giving for a lot of different players at various times. Proxy wars in Angola, Rhodesia, but all these places have been the Philippines. All these places have been caught in the middle of the global struggle between nations that are superpowers, that are so dominant that they, being a vassal to one or the other becomes your only option. And geography dictates a lot of that for a lot of these smaller countries. The method of waging that proxy war for the free trade, individual rights, democracy crowd for that side of the world, which we generally identify as the Western side of the world. For that side of the world, the self-determination side of the world, the idea is to attract people to you with soft power in the sense, so soft power defined as attractive force, whereas hard power would be repulsive or destructive force. So attract them into trade relationships to foster dependency. That will occur naturally. You don't have to manipulate anybody or lie to anybody or assassinate anybody to get that to happen. You just make trade beneficial to them, and they get sucked into a relationship with you. China's in that situation right now. If all U.S. and European trade were to just be cut off, China would collapse, like, instantly, because their entire real estate market would collapse. The currency would be shown to be the joke that it is. Supply, and very quickly, China's absolutely, utterly dependent on external inputs to their manufacturing economy. So having an expansion, a growth-based economy that's based on imports of raw goods and exports of finished products, that makes them completely dependent on the outside world. Which, if you think through that, you may identify some holes in the current Chinese strategy of regional domination. So the Western side tends to try to attract people through trade, to develop a mutual, codependency, to prevent violence in the future, because it's not beneficial for two parties in a trade. It's not beneficial for them to come to blows with one another, because it breaks the trade, and if that's the foundation of their economy or their livelihood, then it's bad for everybody. So it's always a worse. The threat of destruction is always so much higher than the potential rewards of engaging in that violence, that you kind of always stay on the negotiating level. The sort of Occidental side of things, the Marxist-leaning side of things, from the Cold War, the way that they engaged was they knew that they couldn't really win proxy wars directly, because you didn't want to have, like, Soviet troops shooting at American troops directly. So they have to foster their own proxies. So, the American Green Berets go out and train up a Vietnamese force of locals to go fight against other Vietnamese that are trained and being run and supported by the Soviets. And it was obvious in the weapons. You see, M16s on the, on the American Mike forces were using M16s, and the North Vietnamese, both the Viet Cong insurgents and the North Vietnamese military, they were using Soviet-designed weapons. So usually Chinese-produced, but Soviet-designed weapons. It was obvious right there. That's the ideological conflict. That's it. Ideology. When you attract people to trade, you don't really have to push ideology too hard, because money's good. People like that. People like to be productive. They like to do stuff. They like to own their own things. There's a natural desire for the fruits of your own labor. But if that is a competing ideology for you, the only way to fight against that is through ideological indoctrination. So, what you wind up with is a situation where two nations cannot compete directly very hard. Because if they do, they'll come to blows, and blows will very quickly escalate to the logical outcome of MAD, of mutual assured destruction. So they can't do that. The United States and China are in that situation. They can't do that. The Western side winds up building an alliance based on trade relationships, essentially, and trying to foster interdependence that way. The Occidental side, that's the Occidental program. The Oriental side of that, and I'm East-West, it's hard because the planet's not really split East-West cleanly in this, but ideologically speaking, the Marxist connected, so the collectivist connected side, their full engagement winds up becoming ideological in nature. And that is what we are seeing all across the West right now. It's very clear that we are in a mutually assured destruction situation. That's obvious. What's not as obvious to people in the West is that they are under current assault right now via ideological proxies, who usually don't even know that they're ideological proxies. the ideology of collectivism takes compassion, natural compassion, weaponizes it, and uses it to destroy, weaken, and destroy the society, or at least render vulnerable the society that's being essentially infected with this viral idea. Um, so this is that's kind of what that's the natural outcome of mutual assured destruction. Is you're going to have some folks that are going to try to engage in trade formation, which is really informal alliance formation of alliances via trade, attraction to trade, and that could be seen as sort of the Occidental side today. The Oriental side, or the collectivist side, or the Marxist side, or whatever, it's sort of a nebulous. There's been so many different, I guess, sub ideologies within that. It's hard to pick a single good label for it. But I guess the anti-Western element today, they will always engage in subversive ideological warfare because that is what they're primed for. That's what they're focused on. And the way this is playing out is quite obvious today. The West has, or the American connected system has developed a tremendously, the most robust trade network in human history. It's amazing. It's really, really amazing. This is the most prosperous time in history, still, even after the insanity of last year. This is the most prosperous time in human history. But on the back of that, we already see the American Republic giving way to the American Empire. Now, up until now, that's been a thing that was more of a postulate than a reality, but it is now becoming a reality because the internals of the United States are changing. The Constitution is absolutely disregarded. It's like, it's the right way to do things. It's the right way to fix all the problems we've got. When I say we, as a whole, there's a lot of American problems that are bleeding out of that. And I'm not in the United States right now, but the way to fix the American system is to just go back very strictly, abruptly to the United States Constitution and follow that. That's not going to happen, though. When I say strictly follow the Constitution, I mean in an absolute sense. The FBI is not even legal. There's nothing preventing a federation of states from taking the FBI as a blueprint and creating their own interstate law enforcement agency. But under the federal aegis, as part of the office of the executive, right? Under the executive branch, that's not allowed. Nor is the DEA, nor drug prohibition laws and all that. Everything that's happening up there at the federal level, pushing everything up to the federal level, that is the magic trick that this ideology that's assaulting the West is using. They try to push every local issue up to the federal level. The United States is far too diverse a country to have a single law for everything, especially civil laws. So that only guarantees strife. That guarantees lowest common denominator laws that no one's satisfied with. And it ensures strife. That's a crippling blow to the American system. And yet, if you push against it, what do you hear immediately? You're a racist, you're a bigot, you're a homophobe, you're whatever. So ad hominem attacks, not attacking your point, and then immediately pivoting to, that means you hate children. That means you hate whatever. You hate this. You hate that. It's a moralistic argument that's based on emotions, and that's the heart of collectivist ideology, is to weaponize compassion. So the way that I see things is we've already established mutual assured destruction. China has elevated itself to that level in terms of competition. They are sucked directly into, they're knee deep in the mutual trade relationship that the United States fostered through the old meaning, the Eisenhower style of globalism, not globalism as global government, because that's insane. They've taken that and they've turned it on its head and injected an ideological undercut to things, and now we have an ideological civil war in the United States. It's not an open civil war, but it is an ideological civil war, and it's between authority versus liberty. Whereas in Europe, authority is already a given. Their fight over there is on national authority versus global authority, and national authority always winds up winning out for natural. If you're familiar with logistics, it's pretty obvious why that always winds up working out that way, because essentially it boils down to a logistical issue. But anyway, In the U.S., the ideological competition between authority versus liberty, uh, the authoritarians are using compassion-based arguments to weaponize compassion and use emotion to undercut the foundations, the founding principles of the United States, which is kind of fascinating. It's very interesting to see this happen. I wish it wouldn't lead to such potentially tragic outcomes. And we don't know where this is going to go, but that's kind of what's happening. And part of that is because we are in this situation where technology is at a level now terrestrially where as long as we're still on Earth, you can strike point A to point B pretty quickly. You can communicate effectively, instantly. Uh, and that has linked us together in a way that we didn't expect. So you've got the attractive trade, liberty-based ideology fighting against the centralized authoritarian ideology. And this one uses um, intention-based arguments. They judge the intent of a program or the intent of an action. They judge the action by its intention, not its outcome. And over here, you've basically got people who are willing to be flippant and dismissive of intentions and only look at outcomes. And the outcome-based arguments are always closer to reality, but they never sound nice. They're not emotionally satisfying. Whereas the intention-based arguments, man, those feel really good, but the effects of them are typically disastrous, and sometimes they're designed to be disastrous. So that's sort of the stress that we get into uh, when when you have no real way to openly fight. You're going to compete in another way. This gets back to a central rule in geopolitics and economics, which is that competition is not optional. So we're going to compete somehow. We have removed absolute military competition from the table because it's too risky for both parties. So they're competing in different ways right now. And that's what I'm watching. The funny thing about this is that on both sides, the only way that the other side's strategy is effective is if the people on your side are not really aware of what's going on. So that's kind of interesting that, yeah, signing that contract to make yourself a bunch of money on the Chinese side, that's playing into the Americans' hands, sort of. And on the American side, buying into a collectivist argument is playing into the CCP's hands. And that's not always obvious to them, to people doing this either. So, uh, interesting times. Um, you know, continue to monitor the situation because there's really nothing else to do except for monitor the situation and take care of your family and keep making cool stuff. Be a good person locally. Be a good faith actor. That's the only way out of the stuff that we're in right now is to be a good faith actor. So you be a good faith actor. Keep being a good person. Be awesome. Take care.